Okay, good morning. We are doing Chapter 8, learning about the Civil War. Let's do a quick review of our key terms. Katie, who is an abolitionist?
Somebody who wants to end slavery.
Someone who wants to end slavery. What does it mean to secede? Oh, is my pen not going to work? Pen is not working. What does it mean to secede?
Oh, there it goes.
Oh, there it is. Zoe.
To withdraw from an organization or country.
To withdraw from an organization or country. So when we talk about it in terms of the Civil War, it's the states that wanted to withdraw from the United States, those southern states. What is the Union? Izzy? Yeah, it's the United States of America. It's a shortened version of it. And that's what they used for the northern states who stayed in the United States of America. They were called the Union. And the southern states that seceded were called the Confederacy. So tell me more about that, Katie.
The Confederacy states were 11 states who wanted to have slavery. And they wanted to secede from the Union.
Yep, so it's those 11 southern states that wanted to leave because they didn't want to be told that they could not have slavery anymore. Emancipation Proclamation. Maddie.
Is it law or an order issued by the U.S. President Abraham Lincoln? Oh, yeah. The law issued by Abraham Lincoln January 1st,
1863.
That all people in the southern, or all slaves in the southern states were free because none of them were.
Yeah. It's that proclamation that Abraham Lincoln made, the U.S. president, on January 1st, 1863. He was proclaiming that those rebelling southern states, any enslaved person that lived there was now free. And it was specifically, Maddie's right, it was specifically for those rebelling Confederate states because the northern states, they were already free. Amendment, Zoe.
A change to a government process or document.
A change to a government process or document. When we talk about the United States, what document is it? I'm not sure what's going on over here, but it is very distracting when I see people moving all around, tapping on people, making faces, looking around. Please stop. It's very distracting. We just need to take a breath and be calm and get focused into social studies. When we talk about the United States, what amendments are we talking about? To what document? Will W? The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments, but what document do the Bill of Rights amend? What document are they changing? Caitlin? The U.S. Constitution. All right, so let's look at our reading for today. We're going to start learning about some actual Minnesotans, real live people that lived during the Civil War. Page 152, Freedom for Eliza Winston. Because I'm recording, I'm doing the readings. Okay, it was my Omram's turn to be able to do the readings out loud themselves, so you get to hear my beautiful voice today. The Mississippi River had become a highway between Minnesota and the cotton plantations of the South. Hundreds of steamboats traveled on the river, carrying passengers in comfort and style. Many of these passengers were wealthy Southerners taking what was called the fashionable tour, a popular steamboat trip that traveled the Mississippi River. Hotels in St. Anthony and Minneapolis welcomed the Southern visitors because they were good for business. These Southerners sometimes created a problem when they brought their enslaved household workers with them. Why would it be a problem?
Because they're in the North, they didn't have slaves because they were.
In the North, there is no slavery, so they're bringing slaves into the North but they're from the South where it's allowed, but now they're in the North, and controversy ensues. In the summer of 1860, a well-to-do Mississippi plantation owner named Richard Christmas arrived in St. Anthony. He was accompanied by his wife, Mary, their child, and an enslaved servant named Eliza Winston. Winston's duties were to care for the child and to wait on a sickly Merry Christmas. When Winston reached Minnesota, she knew she was in a free state, but she wasn't sure what that meant. Did it mean she could just walk away from her master? If she did, where would she go? How would she live? Would anyone help her? These questions were answered when she met Emily and Ralph Gray, a free African-American couple who lived in St. Anthony. The Grays were friends of Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery. He was an abolitionist who was working to end it. Abolitionists made up a nationwide movement of both African Americans and European Americans who sought freedom for all. So these questions that she had were real questions. Think about that. If you are a slave, do you have any property? No. Do you have any money? No. Do you have any education? Probably not. So if you're freed and you walk away from your master, what do? You don't have money to buy a house, to buy food. You don't have an education to get a job. So where do you go? Here's Eliza Winston coming from Mississippi up to Minnesota. She doesn't know anyone. She doesn't have family she can go stay with until she gets it all figured out. So it's really easy to say, oh, the slaves should be free. Let the slaves go. But then what? So it's not a simple thing of, hey, we need to respect the life and dignity of all people. They should be free. We need to follow through on what comes next. Just freeing them. Do we want them to be homeless on the streets? I mean, that's not fair either, right? That's not what we want for them. So there needs to be people to help them. So thankfully, Eliza was able to meet the Grays, who had gone through it themselves. They were a freed couple. So they knew the things that she needed. The Grays wanted to help Eliza Winston become free. With the help of some white friends, the Grays convinced Judge Charles Vanderburg to consider Winston's case. Vanderburg sent a sheriff to the house where the Christmases were staying with an order to take Winston into custody. That evening, the judge held a hearing. The whole town was excited. Abolitionists were joyful because they believed the state law was being enforced. Others claimed that Winston had been kidnapped, that they had no right to take her away from the Christmases. She was kidnapped from them. They worried that publicity about the case would drive away rich Southern visitors. Minnesota merchants depended on the money these visitors spent. Vanderburg heard arguments from both sides and quickly gave his ruling. Eliza Winston was no longer enslaved. She was free to go where she pleased. But finding a place to go, however, would not be easy. That night, a mob of people surrounded the Grays' house where they thought Winston was staying. They demanded that she be returned to the Christmases. Some threw stones through the windows, and others broke into the home. They searched for Winston, but she was not there. The Grays and their friends had sent Winston to a safe location out of town. It's not known exactly where she went during this time, but she did return to the area a few months later to speak to an abolitionist group. It's not clear what happened to her after that. She didn't want to be this big figurehead fighter. She just wanted to be free and live her life. So there's not a lot of more history on her. But think about what it was like for the Grays, who are at their house after the ruling, and all of a sudden this big mob comes. People are yelling and screaming at them, throwing stuff through their windows, breaking into their house, searching for Eliza. Thankfully, they realized that, you know what, she's probably not safe here because people get really angry when change happens. And we want to make sure that she's safe. Thankfully, they didn't do anything to the Grays. They let them be. But it was a scary time. Not just in this particular case, but this was happening all over. People were angry that their way of life was having to change. The merchants were upset that they were going to lose money of the tourists coming from the South. The Southerners were upset that if they came up to Minnesota, they would lose their slaves. So there was a lot of anger going around. Southerners were upset by the outcome, and tourism to the area quickly declined. Local business people, such as C.W. McLean, owner of the Winslow House Hotel, were also upset. They had profited from Southern tourists and were angry at the abolitionists for hurting their business. Abolitionists in Minnesota and other northern states were pleased with the results of this case. They hoped for more successes, but they had no idea how quickly the nation would be plunged into a civil war. That it wasn't just a, hey, we're changing and we need to make the change. There was big fighting happening, and it wasn't just arguing like what we've had in the United States these last few years, where the Republicans and the Democrats are yelling at each other and upset with one another. This was even more. This was even scarier, and it came all the way to war. Home of the brave. By the fall of 1860, many Minnesotans were turning their attention to politics. In November, they joined with voters, only white men at that time, in other northern states to elect Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States. No southern states had voted for Lincoln. Southerners believed his election marked the beginning of the end. To them, Lincoln's victory signaled the end of the Southern way of life, a way of life that depended on slavery. This was a turning point in the nation's history. As a result of Lincoln's victory, Southern states seceded. They declared themselves separate from the United States and formed their own country, the Confederate States of America. President Lincoln announced that it was not legal for the United States to split in two. The Confederates did not back down. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on U.S. troops stationed at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy, were at war. Both sides immediately began building up armies, with each state expected to provide a share of the soldiers. Minnesota contributed a volunteer regiment of 1,009 men. It was made up of soldiers from St. Anthony, St. Paul, and other nearby towns. The 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry Regiment, the first of many regiments from Minnesota, trained at Fort Snelling. And when I toured the Capitol a few years ago, they said that because Minnesota had representatives in Washington, D.C., when war was declared, they were the first ones out of all of the northern states to sign up to say, yes, we will commit to sending regiment of soldiers to help fight in the war. So Minnesota was the very first state that volunteered to send people. Paisley?
In summer care once, we took a field trip to the Capitol in the Basilica, and actually, Leah and Jocelyn, we all went, and we saw the whole thing. We took a tour of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, so Charlie Goddard goes to war. So we learned about a slave that was freed. Now we're going to learn about somebody who becomes a soldier. Charlie Goddard was 15 years old when the call for volunteers went out. Goddard lived in the Mississippi River town of Winona. He was an adventuresome boy. When he was 12, he had scared his mother and many other people in town by swimming all the way across the river through its dangerous currents. Now he was determined to join what he figured would be the adventure of a lifetime, war. So he's looking at it as kind of a glamorous thing. Whoa, this is going to be an adventure. How fun. Is that really what war is like? He's only 15. He's pretty young. He doesn't understand the reality of it all. There was just one problem. He wasn't old enough. Men had to be 18 to enlist, just like today. So you have to be 18 years old to join the Army. That's the same age back then, but he's only 15. But that didn't stop Goddard. When Winona men started enlisting, he lied about his age and signed up too. Now you have to show more proof. You have to show your birth certificate. There's a lot more you have to go through, and everything is digital, so they'll know. It's not easy to lie about it now. Nick?
And can you be 17 in order to enlist?
I thought it was still 18.
I think it depends, but I think you can join at 17 for the National Guard or for training camps. But I'm not entirely.
I'm not positive, and you might need a parent to approve it, but I'm not positive. A few days later, he and 75 other Winona volunteers boarded a steamboat and traveled upriver to Fort Snelling. For nearly 2 months, Goddard trained to become a soldier. He learned how to march in formation, fire a musket, and follow orders. On June 22nd, 1861, Goddard and the rest of the 1st Minnesota Regiment left Fort Snelling and headed for Washington, D.C. He had just turned 16. So, the soldiers' provisions. When soldiers like Charlie Goddard joined the Army, they received certain items or provisions they would need during their service. These provisions included a uniform, weapons, candles, food, and canteens for water. Because soldiers had to carry their supplies, these provisions needed to be lightweight enough to carry while marching. Others who contributed to the war effort, such as surgeons, also required equipment designed for easy movement. One of the provisions that they had was the food that they're carrying. They had something called hardtack. So hardtack is a hearty cracker made from flour, salt, and water. Hardtack was long-lasting enough to be easily stored and transported from the bakery to the field. So it would last for a long time. It's not just a quick car ride from the bakery to the battlefield. They had to walk. So it was able to last for days and days. It was called tooth breakers because these crackers were so tough that they often needed to be softened. Sometimes they would do that by frying it up with bacon grease to soften it up. Sometimes they would dunk it in their coffee to soften it so it wouldn't be quite so hard. And sometimes to offset the mold, that would also help soften it. Ugh. So think about this. They're carrying this hardtack for days and days, maybe weeks. So think about when bread sits out on your counter for a couple of weeks, it gets moldy. Mold doesn't actually hurt you, but you don't want to eat it. So they were having this cracker and it would get moldy, and that would be their only food. So they would have to eat this moldy hardtack. Was life as a soldier easy? Not at all. Maddie?
Wait, what is the description of hardtack?
It's made from flour, salt, and water, and it's really it's hard. It's a hard cracker, and so you would have to dunk it in your coffee to soften it up so you don't chip a tooth. They called it tooth breakers because it was so hard. All right, Charlie at 16. Goddard started writing to his mother, Catherine Goddard, as soon as he reached Washington, D.C. In an early letter, he admitted that he was looking forward to his first taste of battle. The truth of it is, he wrote, I would like to be in a little more danger where I could have a chance at some secession soldiers and finish up the job and go home to old Winona. Goddard didn't know better. He didn't yet realize how terrifying and bloody war could be. He had never experienced anything like that, and he didn't realize what it truly meant. Okay? Even you guys, you play games on your video games. And you're like, oh yeah, you shoot people die. You don't know what it's like in real life. And it's very, very different. It's not a game. Nolan?
He survived.
Oh, we're going to find out. Not today. We're going to read more about him tomorrow. About a month after arriving in Washington, D.C., Goddard and the rest of the 1st Minnesota Regiment set out for the first major fight of the Civil War. It was the First Battle of Bull Run on July 21st, 1861. On the way there, Goddard got sick and had to stay behind. It was just as well for him. After hours of fierce combat, the Confederates forced the Union Army to retreat. The 1st Minnesota suffered more than any other Union regiment at Bull Run. At least 42 men were killed, around 108 were wounded, and 34 were missing. So that's almost 200 out of the 1,000 men. Back in Winona, Catherine Goddard heard about the regiment's losses. She wrote her son reminding him that he was too young to be a soldier. He replied that she should not worry. I hope that you will not speak to me about coming home yet, unless it is your direct order, he wrote. I want to do some good before I go back home. Goddard did not see much fighting as a 16-year-old. He wouldn't experience the terrible realities of war until the next year. So, as a 16-year-old, it was still pretty mild. He missed out on the huge battle because he was sick. And then there weren't any other big battles for the rest of that year. We're going to find out tomorrow what it was like when he was 17, when he was 18. Nolan's really curious to find out if he survives or if he passes away. So no spoilers. If you look ahead, no spoilers. Okay, we're going to find out what happens to Charlie Goddard tomorrow. Shh. Joseph, I'm still recording. So for our friends at home, we hope you are doing well and we hope to see you soon. Well, why is it... Did it not record? Oh.